Hey all, sorry, running late trying to get logged into Zoom correctly with the right credentials. So I think everybody is here for a SIG release meeting, and this meeting will be recorded. It is August the 12th. The notes are in the invite link, and for anybody on the Zoom right now who doesn't have them, I will drop this in the chat. Please behave according to the code of conduct. Obviously, since this is being recorded, your actions will be there for all to see. And if anybody is interested in taking notes, I see people are typing their names already in the agenda doc. That would be awesome if folks could do that. Feel free to also put your name under note taker if you're wanting to take that on. So in terms of agenda, we are just kind of reshuffling, reorganizing our agenda to do some walkthroughs of project board and then test grid status and our standard sub-projects. But 2 weeks ago, we had a fair amount of conversation about if or which of the sub-projects maybe we should shuffle out elsewhere. So we'll see what we have for updates today. And other than that, nobody has suggested anything that they want to talk about today on the open agenda. So we'll see what we have. So the first thing that we're trying to do is make a point of welcoming any new attendees. It looks like we might have a couple in the participants list. If you feel like introducing yourself, please do, otherwise no obligation.
Hi, I'm Angela Lewis. This is my first ever meeting. I was invited by Stephen, who's on the team with us. Sorry, I'm from VMware.
Ah, okay.
So I'm a project manager supporting the Kubernetes architects team at VMware, and been wanting to get into the upstream. So I probably be observing for a while. I've met Kenny, so nice meeting you all. I love all your waving hands.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else? Going once. Going twice. All right, well, I guess then we can move on. So sub-project updates. One of the big questions 2 weeks ago was whether we need to have Hypercube giving out its status here. And then there were some other questions that came up during the release engineering meeting and subsequently. So I'm just gonna write in the agenda like TBD if we track this here, because it's not clear that we want to or need to. So moving along, licensing was also something that there was discussion of maybe pushing over to the release engineering meeting. But Nikita, anything that you want to update on it or anybody else?
Yeah, that should be me. So I don't have too many updates there, but we need to first set up a licensing sub-project meeting because it doesn't exist today. It's on my list for this week, so you should be hearing about a doodle on the mailing list soon. It's moving a little slow because there are so many other things to do, but hopefully it should pick up pace in the next few weeks.
One of the problems we're having is also finding time where people are available for meetings because there's so many different community ones, plus people often have day jobs as well. So just to throw it out there, if you struggle to find an agreeable time for folks on the doodle, we could also combine it in with the release engineering meeting and make sure that we have a dedicated block of time where we always talk about the licensing related things as well. So
yeah,
sorry. I was just going to say, I'll say for this meeting, I'll have one vote for actually having a licensing status. It's just because if there is stuff to report there, it's somewhat different from a question of, building binaries, et cetera, and may require, if there's an issue coming from the licensing subgroup, it's probably something we have to escalate to the steering committee. So I think we should have a separate status for licensing.
Yeah, I think that could be useful because we've also had the Linux Foundation lawyer join us in these meetings before, so you can probably set it up. We'll probably try to keep it monthly or at most bi-weekly, so we'll see how that goes.
And the other thing, since we have you, is the publishing bot. I saw you put out a PR on that.
Yep. So first thing is that Publishing Bot is not a sub-project by itself anymore. It's under release engineering now, but I can just give a quick update anyway. So I've created a PR to add rules for the release 1.16 branches and remove the 1.12 ones because the 1.16 branch will be created tomorrow and the 1.12 jobs will be removed. So yeah, I just wanted the Publishing Bot PR to be ready once the branches are good to go. And one more minor point is that we recently moved the Publishing Bot images to use the GCR staging repo instead of Docker Hub. So it's now completely running on CNCF infrastructure, which I think is sort of nice. And overall, well, it's happy, it's running, and it's doing its job right now. So yeah, that's pretty much it from Publishing Bot.
Awesome. So then that's our first bullet point, I suppose, technically under release engineering. So for folks, I think a large part of the folks on the call are probably aware, but for a long time, we've had just a SIG release meeting and we've focused on a few high-level SIG release things, but often there's been a chunk of things within that were related just to the release team, which is a separate sub-project. But we were neglecting the tooling behind a lot of this and process discussions and things like that. So we've set up a sub-project called Release Engineering. And as of last week, we've had our first meeting to talk about our kind of roadmap for updating and revamping the tools there. There's kind of a big to-do at this point to document the global plan of action. We've had a fair amount of brainstorming, we've had some investigations, but the sort of general status is let's get that all now into a plan and a set of issues so that people can bite off some parts of those. We've also got a number of proof of concept things that people have been hacking on. Bart Smikla and Hannes Horrell and Stephen Augustus have been doing a variety of things, and I've done a little bit as well. But that's kind of where we are, like trying to transition from ideas and brainstorming into some concrete actions. And we're hoping, I think it's optimistic that we'll have a lot changed in the 1.16 cycle, but I think we can have a fair amount of things proved out in the 1.16 cycle, and then maybe early in the 1.17 cycle when it's safe to do some experimentation, try swizzling out some tooling there. So I would say that's kind of the release engineering update. So any questions there before I move on?
Yeah, what sort of ideas are you talking about?
So yeah, the high level big picture, you can look at it from a couple of ways. On the initiating of the build side of the pipeline, historically, like a year ago and prior, that was always done by Googlers. So we've been trying to make it so that the community can run the process of starting things and getting them out to publishing. If you go all the way to the other end of the pipeline, the way we publish things, especially in terms of debs or RPMs, but to some extent also the containers, it's been kind of opaque. There haven't been a lot of people with visibility. So on that end goal side, again, getting more people on the front end, but on the end, be publishing to the CNCF funded or hosted infrastructure that's coming up through the working group, Kate's Infra, shifting that output side more out from Google. And there, in particular, right now, we just publish for the debs and RPMs a yum repo and a deb or apt repo. And that's really problematic for version control on the consumption side. So one of the big things that we want to do is split that out. There should be a repo for yum or for apt, whichever, distinct obviously because they're different ecosystems, but there should be one for 1.15. There should be another one for 1.16. There should be one for 117, so that you can subscribe to the thing that you're in. And obviously, we'd probably also have a latest, so you could subscribe to latest if you wanted. And at the point that, say, 116 was stable, latest would become 116's content. But the idea that we have that kind of promotion ability then would also flow into the individual repos. So instead of having a 116 repo for Yum, we'd actually have something like a nightly, a testing, and a stable. So the nightlies would be akin to what's going on in test grid for the periodic testing, where we'd be doing periodic continuous build and integration. And where we are happy with the outputs there, we'd promote that to testing, such as a alpha, beta, RC release. And where those have passed, that thing would get promoted up into the stable repository. So the idea is to do more in a CI/CD pipeline sort of direction, have promotion of artifacts that have tested good, have community members running that on the input, have community hosting on the output. That's kind of the high level. Does that make sense?
So like do some of the things that we're supposed to be doing as a cloud native project. We're supposed to be enabling other people to do as a cloud native project.
Yeah, kind of like moving to modern best practice software engineering, where I think, especially on the release side of things, we were kind of waterfall. We largely built and released at the end of a release cycle. So on the next sub-project readout, release team, is there anybody here from the release team who'd like to give a brief update on where things stand?
Hello. I don't know if Lockie's on, but since I'm doing the next meeting, I figured I would do this one as well quick. So just from a high level overview, we're doing the 116 branch cut, as Nikita said, and we are also going to remove the 112 jobs and create the 116 jobs. Next week, burn down begins, code freezes at the end of the month. We have had one more enhancements exception. That was the metrics overhaul that Bob, Kenny, and Lockie did a lot of work to move through. And yeah, CI is kind of not the greatest right now, but we should be cleaning that up in the next week or two. Questions, thoughts, comments, insults, anything?
No insults. Blameless retrospectives is how we do things, right? So on the CI front, are y'all getting sufficient interaction from the SIGs?
For the most part, that is something I would want to defer to George if he is on. I know that we have 2 red and 3 flaking, but I don't actually know in depth what those 2 reds are, so I don't want to say yet.
Okay. Well, and actually the next thing on the agenda is to give a look at test grid, so I can actually do that briefly. So for anybody new, this is testgrid.kates.io. This is where our CI results are visible. It's loosely organized by SIG, and depending on how you pull this up, these cards show up in different places, but SIG release being here, I can go tunnel into that. And you have sort of navigation tabs across the top. So what Jeff was talking about would be SIG release master blocking, the things on the master branch that are potentially blocking release. So you can see that we have a couple of failings. We historically have a fair amount of flaky tests, but if we go tunnel in, for example, into the GCE COS master alpha features that are failing, we can see there are a lot of failures just lately and have been since late last week. The other thing for folks that are new that you can do, maybe not so obvious in the UI, is you can click on a green box and drag over to a red box, and when you release, you get a search for changes. And for people who are triaging issues, you can see basically the get difference between those 2 points. And potentially you have a performance issue. Wojtek normally is doing performance related things. It's interesting that it's around PVCs, since the test that's failing is around dynamic PVs. So that's kind of how we tend to triage things. The release team would be going through these specifically, looking for a way to get into connection with folks who are doing things there. With respect to SIG release though, so SIG release weekly or daily is going through their boards. For the overall SIG, we have the release miscellaneous. Those are looking green today. These are just some initial simple test cases we have. Publishing bot, as Nikita said, is running. Our SIG release orphaned, these are all failing as expected because they're orphaned. That means we don't have somebody who's taking care of them. But basically, I would say nothing much for us to need to go look at this week.
Except there is something for us, and maybe somebody's already working on this, but at this point, we don't have any upgrade downgrade tests that are not orphaned.
So I skipped over the release informing. Oh, and it doesn't, yes, it does. So it's got the kind-based one only. Yeah, this is a really big problem we have. This has also come up in the last week too, because for the patch branches, well, if I look at 115 blocking, it's okay. We've got some flakes in there. But we made a change to the Golang toolchain, and we wanted to get as broad as possible as feedback on how that went. So if we want to look at SIG release 115 all, we again have a ton of tests that are failing. I did some debug there last week, and it's not all bad. There's a limited number of issues there. In particular, it seems like there's some issues around storage. So we can get some partial signal if we're willing to tunnel in and convince ourselves that the bits of red are things that we're able to tolerate. But yeah, totally valid point that we should have more up in this level.
I feel like it's probably, I think it's up to us rather than the release team, up to this meeting rather than the release team to assign somebody to work with cluster lifecycle, I guess, to come up with upgrade and downgrade tests that they're going to maintain.
And so this is something that we could change. They do have them. So if I go into...
They have tests that fail regularly, and they ignored the failures because they know what they are. Which has always been the reason why we haven't just crossed them over. So a little bit more green than it has been, though.
Yeah.
So tests we can cross over.
We could choose to promote some of these up into release blocking potentially.
Okay.
We're kind of in a weird in-between forked space, I feel like. Initially, all the test coverage we had was GCE using the cluster scripts that weren't well maintained, I guess, to euphemistically describe it. And SIG cluster lifecycle didn't want to touch those. So that was a gap, and there wasn't somebody else to touch them enough, keep them well petted and purring along. So that's why we kicked them out initially. The other thing that's happening between KubeADM is cluster API work. I'm hopeful that between those two, we're going to get to a point where we have more feedback from non-GCE or non-kind test cases for upgrade. And then the third gap there is with respect to downgrade. People want to ensure downgrade coverage, but SIG cluster lifecycle has very explicitly said no. So we're evolving into a slightly better place, but we've definitely lost coverage we used to have.
I think it's also, I feel like API machinery is also like, there's not a real downgrade path, right? There'd be test coverage that is for poorly automatable stats. Like you can't downgrade etcd. It's not a thing you can do safely anyway.
Across the broader concept of us being sort of a distribution and having potentially more things that we publish, and we definitely in our changelogs, we publish the set of things that we tested together. Those components are not under tight control, much less upgrade or downgrade to be. I mean, we hardly even specify them consistently in the first place, much less lifecycle manage them.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I've just added myself on there to follow up. I'm going to delve into some of the SIG cluster, since they're having more green stuff now, SIG cluster lifecycle tests, to see if there's a couple of upgrade tests that we could potentially cross over to the SIG release boards and put in informing, and then maybe in blocking for the next cycle if they prove reliable.
Just jotting a few notes on that. All right, so I can kill that window. On the project board, well, I guess I should first pause for a moment. Do others have questions about anything in test grid? All right, then let me get the project board pulled up here. And share that window. All right, make this a little bit wider. So if you are, this is kind of a dense screen visually, I feel like. If you're trying to follow along, I will drop the link into the notes. It's github.com/orgs/Kubernetes/projects, and it's the project board number 23. So in progress, we've got Nico's work on the needs triage automation, and I don't see Nico on the call today, I don't think. No, okay. Can try and ping out to him and see where that is. The next one, make etcd world executable in Docker image. Marked as 116. I don't remember this one going by. Yeah, it looks like it's practically ready, but for, oh yeah, and we reviewed it in the prior meeting, so we just need to follow up and try and get a final approver there. I'll circle back after the meeting and look at that. Our in progress. This one should be relatively ready to close. We've got quite a few people from non-US time zones, so hopefully this meeting, based on the doodle, is sufficient. I'm gonna mark this one closed. One thing that's come up and that we should possibly consider is whether we have two different time meetings. When we finished the doodle, a few people said, oh, I hadn't seen the doodle, or that time is really bad for me. I definitely cannot make it. So we've gained a good number of people by shifting the time, but we've also lost a cluster of folks who were active or intending to be active in the coming period. So we may have some future refinement yet to do on the time zones. Meetings are hard. The next one in progress, 8715, failing tests on test grid. We just had these open. And I think, those are in release master informing. I was expecting to see them in SIG release MISC. So those are still failing. And this isn't going to change for a bit. Steven's assigned it to himself. That's basically right. We need to kind of rewrite these tests as a part of the other rewriting we're doing around the Yum repos. So I think those are just going to stay in progress for the next bit. But I'm going to leave that tab open just as a reminder to give an update in there on where we are. Another one on the etcd image. What is the difference between these two? We just glanced at this one needing review. Make etcd world executable in Docker image.
Maybe it's about running as root and not as root.
It's issues versus polls. So this one fixes the pull request fixes 79.720, and this issue is 79.20. So I think those are basically the same thing. All right. So kind as release blocking, when we were in test grid just a moment ago, we saw it there. If I go here and look for kind, we have 3 kind tests. And if I go over to master blocking, we don't? I thought we just looked and we did. Was I on the wrong board? Huh. All right, well, then in that case, I'm gonna update the minutes. We don't actually have kind testing in blocking. We have a kind testing in the informing board. So this, I thought 2 weeks ago we had decided we were gonna make this happen, but we just haven't PR'd it yet. So it looks like that's another thing to follow up on after the meeting, is to get the PR in place for that.
To create the jobs? Just
to shift the jobs from the informing board to the blocking board.
I can do that.
Okay, and let's go ahead and double check. I know we talked about it in SIG release, but double check with the release team. I feel like it was discussed there and people had given the thumbs up, but let's double check, and then obviously the PR will get reviewed as well for confirmation.
Correct.
Okay, so I am going to, well, first I want to just glance in here, since we realize there's a difference between polls and issues. Do we have a PR sitting somewhere for that already? Oh, and I can't search for kind because kind shows up as kind in the descriptive thing. Well, visually, I'm not seeing one that has kind in the subject on a quick glance. Okay, so Carlos, I'm going to assign this to you. if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks.
Wait, I saw you. There you are. Okay. Cool. And then I will shift that over to in progress. Update and clarify release notes process, SIG release number 729. Sasha, I think I saw you on the call. Anything you want to comment here?
Yeah, there is this one link PR open right now, and Steven put it on hold. I'm not sure what he thinks about it.
Okay. Well, we can follow up and see what he was seeing there, what he's looking for. Yeah, doesn't say why. I think since we've got PRs, I'm going to go ahead and move that one over to in progress.
Yep.
And I'll assign it to you, Sasha.
Sure.
Okay. Next, then, on the list, travel sponsorship considerations for SIG release members. This was discussed, so not specific to SIG release, but the Kubernetes steering issue, the steering folks discussed it last week in their steering meeting. I don't feel like there was a clear output from that, but this is kind of at their level right now. So I think as we open this, we were hopeful that we might be able to get affirmation of the ability to get some funding for folks like from the release team who didn't have it otherwise to go to KubeCon. But I feel like the discussion in the steering committee meeting last week was that if they get this going, it's probably going to be too late for this KubeCon, but that they're trying to figure something out.
So for this KubeCon, it's going to be sort of like an ad hoc process, sort of like it has been in the past. In the future, right now, it's looking like we'll probably use the same forms and processes for the diversity scholarship, and essentially, if it will just go down the list of if they're not picked for the diversity scholarship or one of the other things that sort of comes out of that pool, it will then go to us for review.
Okay. Us being
the Kubernetes, it's a TBD on who actually makes that call.
So if I'm updating this issue, should I say check in with SIG chairs or Contribex or?
Yeah, I would have, if people are, if this is something that they're having trouble getting to KubeCon, I'd bring up the SIG chair and then have the SIG chair bring it up with Contribex.
Okay. All right, so then I will, since that's kind of open without a clear exact owner towards resolution, kind of bouncing between a few entities, I'm just going to leave it in the to-do column to track and see how it progresses. Next one then, 76738, umbrella issue for a job that signs artifacts and uploads them to a GCE bucket. I don't believe there's any progress yet on that. And this has obviously been around for a while. Opened in April, discussed in a lot of detail for probably 9 months prior to that. No change other than assigning to Stephen Augustus 2 weeks ago. I think this is optimistic in milestone 1.16, but I think we're hoping to have something proof of concepted in that period. So we'll see. And I guess we should also say area release engineering. And other than that, I think I'll just leave that one in the to-do because we're just ramping what the specifics of the plan for that would be. Hypercube images affected by multiple CVEs. This came up last December and has been the subject of a fair amount of discussion again this last week. We don't have a great way of building and publishing this image trivially right now. I think there's a couple other issues related to this. No, well, if they are, they haven't been added to the project board. This is another one I'll follow up. Stephen and Ben Elder, and were you looking at it at all, Hannes?
I was looking at it, so you can also assign me. I'm assigned to the other image, other issue. But as you said, there is more discussion on that and more things to figure out.
All right, since I'm gonna put a lifecycle frozen and an area release engineering on this. There is work underway on that one, so I'm going to shift it over into in progress. So our next one, 74.375, also an ancient one. Clean up on an individual flaky test. And it's not being actively worked, so we'll leave that on the to-do list. I know Aaron has been looking at a bunch of things along those lines this last week. Oh, here's one that's actually probably partly in progress. So this is issue 73.286, update all active Kubernetes release branches to latest Go. This is actually something that should be sort of a standing part of our processes. Like if we have an issue for this, we could open this issue every month probably and reopen it. So this one happens to be from way back at the beginning of the year. Oh, and it shows as in progress on the release engineering board. That's interesting. Yeah, because I know we are doing some things right now related to that. I'm just going to comment. I don't think Ixty gave a nice generic write-up. And we do have a kind documentation. next one. Questions around some charter scope specifics. Lifecycle frozen. Oh, yeah. So this one, how is this not assigned?
Probably
Oh,
assigned to
it's
someone who's not a SIG release chair anymore.
I think it's because it's in the steering repo. Let's see if I assign myself Stephen Augustus Caleb Miles, what happens? Did it tell me I can't do that? Oh no, it let me do it. Okay. So we as SIG leads, SIG chairs should circle back and make sure that this gets finished. Aaron had had some things that he wanted a little more clarity in our charter before SIG release changed, or SIG steering committee formally said that they're okay with the change here, but I think we're maybe okay there, but we should be able to just get that closed. And then that relates then to the next issue here. Got a number of non-blocking things. This is assigned. I will follow up on that one after the meeting because that should be closable. And then the last one in our to-do list, considerations about enhancement tracking. Lubomir, you are on the call, and we have a few release team members. I'm wondering if there's something here that we could try and drive some forward movement on.
I had a brief discussion with Steven about this, if I'm remembering. Yeah, this is the ticket, okay. I had a discussion with Steven and he proposed that there is already an alternative work in progress to my proposal here, so we didn't take any further action on the ticket. The TLDR of this ticket, as I'm proposing as part of the template, to have machine-readable bits that allow the release team to fetch metadata from GitHub tickets and dump this into some system that can track the progress of individual features that are, in K enhancements, something like that. But this was just a proposal. At this point, I'm okay with closing this if there are better alternatives.
I'm gonna slap a release engineering label on this one just to see if anybody there is interested. Like this could be a useful type of tooling, but if we don't have somebody to code it up, I don't know if we're gonna get anywhere.
I would also get Steven to approve release engineering involvement on this, because he said that there might be alternatives that are much better than this. So, like, again, this might be closed before somebody jumps on working on it.
And labeled priority critical urgent, I feel like it's definitely not been treated that way. Should we acknowledge that and decrease the priority? Are you okay with that, having opened it?
Did I label it like so?
I don't know. Who did? Steven did, so...
I mean, it cannot be critical since nobody's working on it.
Yeah, I think that it's important to try to keep those labels accurate. All right, that is the stuff in the to-do list. We've only got 10 minutes left. I think that I'm going to leave the backlog as backlog. If something needs bubbled up out of there, its priority could be increased by somebody. So in the remaining minutes, has anybody thought of anything in terms of a new topic that they'd like to bring into the agenda? No? All right. Well, shall we call it a meeting then for the week? All right, seeing no objections, a reminder, and where in the past SIG release has been bi-weekly, we continue to be bi-weekly, but in the off weeks, we're having the release engineering meeting. So if you're interested in diving in on some of the tooling and coding and hacking around on that, same time in a week on Monday. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
All right.